Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Devdatta Chakravarti and we are in conversation today with Deep Halder, contributing editor for The Print and the author of a new book, Inshallah Bangladesh, the story of an unfinished revolution in Bangladesh. Today we are in conversation with him since a lot of things have been happening in our neighboring country. The last week saw massive protests across college campuses in Bangladesh, such as the Dhaka University, the Jahangir University, over a Yunus administration's rule which removed or abolished the posts of music teachers and PT teachers within primary schools, a move that many cultural activists and educationists said that was problematic and would take the country back by many years. Now, the government has not given any official explanation for such a move, but when the move was being implemented, it was massively protested by Islamic groups like Jamaat-e-Islami and Hefazat-e-Islam, who called this move un-Islamic and rather wanted a religious studies group to be implemented within primary education systems. Deep, if I could ask you, what do you
Yeah.
think these kind of moves, suggest or show about the broader rising trends of Islamism within Bangladesh as a country which has been founded, on per se secular grounds?
Okay, so this has been a continuing trend since the fall of the Sheikh Hasina government, which is the trend of Islamism pushing forward with a very strong force. Now, interestingly, this idea to have music teachers in primary schools was an idea that was discussed during Sheikh Hasina's time, and it was implemented during this time. The Yunus government decided to implement it during its time. However, there was very, like you said, there was very strong pushback by the Islamist groups and parties, the Jamaat, the Hefazat, and he backtracked. The government backtracked and sort of said no to having music teachers. If you remember, there have been stories, and we at the print have done those stories about how there were protests and there were pushback for women footballers. This
Right.
was sometime last year. There have, and Jamaat Amir, Dr. Shafiqul has himself said, come out and said some rather disturbing things. Like, for instance, most recently, he said that women should spend more time inside homes, and the government should come forward and reward such women who spend more time inside their homes. This made headlines in Bangladesh press. So on the one hand, Jamaat is trying to reach out to the minority Hindu population for the February 2026 elections. Jamaat, if you remember, even last year when after the fall of Hasina, where there were reports of targeted attacks on Hindus in Bangladesh, the Jamaat had assured Hindus that that they'll be given protection. So on the one hand, it's trying to show that it's uh, interestingly, Jamaat Amir had also said in a recent story, I did that story, how it is sorry for any kind of mistake that it has done in the history of Bangladesh. So, to which one journalist had asked that, are you sorry for 1971? Because, Jamaat's role during 1971, where it stood with the Pakistan army against its own citizens of, at that time, East Pakistan. And interestingly, this gentleman said that, why just 1971? Do you want to say that in the history of our land, we have not done any protests before or after? Now, this before or after is a very interesting phrase, because before was East Pakistan. So it's in 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh, right? So if he's saying that, did we not do any mistakes before, which means that he is somehow linking East Pakistan to modern day Bangladesh, which they have always wanted to do. So it's a scare in India that it's now East Pakistan. It's now going to be East Pakistan by another name, as a sovereign country, of course, but a country where the values of Islamism are more important than any other values, whether it's the values of democracy or pluralism. So that's the scare. And since this government took over after the fall of the Sheikh Hasina government, which is the interim government headed by Dr. Yunus, We have seen time and again the government backtrack on several issues which are, or several moves that it wanted to make, which are progressive moves. One thing I want to discuss here, that something that I thought personally was a very interesting move by the Yunus government, which is the women's reform commission that was set up. If you remember, they came up with 433 recommendations, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that some of those recommendations, if implemented, could have been an example for not just Bangladesh but the entire Indian subcontinent. Even the Indian government and Indian policymakers should have had an opportunity to sit up and take notice. There was talk among those recommendations for workers' rights, for sex workers. There was marital rape was discussed. So these are issues that even India hotly debates, and there is no consensus yet. So those recommendations were discussed by the Yunus administration, not by the administration, the commission it set up, but there were
Never
huge protests in
implemented.
Dhaka. Yes, never implemented. In fact, to be fair to the government, they said that all of those recommendations were not supposed to be implemented because they only had a limited time period. But they said that some of these recommendations would have to be implemented. But there were huge protests by radical groups in Dhaka, and they even radical YouTubers called Yunus, an NGO guy who is trying to break Bangladesh, and these are people who had supported Dr. Yunus before. And then nobody discussed those recommendations anymore.
Right.
He had lent his weight to the commission. When the recommendations were tabled, he was there at the ceremony. But after that, nobody's talking about those recommendations. It's same thing. And now we have what you're asking me now. Now we have these cancellation of posts for music teachers in primary schools. So there's a pattern to this. There has been a hard push by Islamists to change the very nature of Bangladesh. And Dr. Muhammad Yunus, who perhaps from time to time has wanted to hold on to a more progressive idea of Bangladesh, had to backtrack. So it is one more example of the government uh, sort of bending over backwards to please the radical elements in Bangladesh.
Right, and this also reminds me of how in November last year, for the fall of the Hasina government, the Lalon Fakir festival in Narayanganj was also stopped because again radical extremist elements did not want for the festival to be done, and this was the first time in Bangladesh's history that the Sufi festival was called off. My question to you then is, now that an election date has been declared and it's supposed to be done within the next 2 months. Mohammad Yunus today came on record and gave a press conference where he said that the July charter and elections will be done on the referendum, and the elections will be done on the same.
Will be held on the same.
In the coming days, do you see the Islamic groups getting more emboldened by the current trend that is ongoing, or will the interim regime be able to to some extent be able to contain them, or is this how Bangladesh is going to look like going onwards?
See, how Bangladesh is going to look like going onwards is a little difficult to say right now. It depends on the outcome of the elections, what kind of party comes to power,
Hmm.
whether the Army League is allowed to sort of participate in the polls. If Bangladesh Nationalist Party, as is widely believed, if there's an election without the Army League, the BNP might come to power. Whether they get the majority, or whether they do an experiment like they did in 2001 when they formed a government with Jamaat. Now it's unlikely they will do a pre-poll alliance, but they can always do a post-poll alliance. So it depends on all of those factors. But one thing I can tell you is the Jamaat has taken control over many of the institutions in Bangladesh, which I think it wanted to do in this period, which is that irrespective of who's in power, like right now, Dr. Yunus is in power, but from the judiciary to changes in the army, promoting a certain kind of officers who have certain kind of leaning, pro-Pakistan leaning, or a very different idea of Bangladesh, that these officers have. So from the judiciary to the armed forces, to the police, to media. There's the Daily Star editor-in-chief has done a column where he said that it's unbelievable that so many journalists could be charged, for murder. I mean, within this short period of time. So even the media, in the media that sort of that's in control of the narrative right now in Bangladesh. So that media, to the bureaucracy. So one by one, all institutions are now filled with Jamaat people, right? So whoever comes to power will have to deal with a system that's filled with Jamaat's men. Now, during Sheikh Hasina's time, whatever her flaws, and her flaws were many, at least the Jamaat was pushed back. She tried to balance it by pulling up the Hefazat. But the point is that at least the Jamaat, which is a very, 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 which has a very different idea of Bangladesh, what we're discussing right now, has been successful to use this period, interim period, to put its men on in key positions, across
across
different fields, across institutions and across sectors, and very important sectors that actually manage Bangladesh's affairs. So imagine if your judiciary is filled with Jamaat's people, if your army is filled with Jamaat officers who are pro Jamaat are now promoted and given key responsibilities. If your police is filled with Jamaat's men, if your media has people who believe in the Jamaat and the idea of Bangladesh that the Jamaat has, then even if there's a new government, there's only that much they can do,
right.
right? So I think Jamaat has done that very successfully. So what I see now is that it will need a, like I said, if there are elections, there is a big if on the elections, but suppose there is an election, suppose the BNP comes to power, with a majority, and suppose sort of it is determined to push the Jamaat out of the system, which is very unlikely. Then then maybe there is a ray of hope. But right now, it looks very unlikely that Bangladesh will take a very progressive stand in the days to come.
So, with that, Deep, right now things don't really look a lot hopeful for Bangladesh. But given the current stream of protests, I would say that if such incidents continue to happen, or such incidents or such kind of protests happen, then I think the civil society will lead to a pushback towards, a rising Islamic force or the rising Islamization, like we discussed. What happens in the elections remains to be seen, but thank you for speaking to us. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.